Men in suits made TV for children. What a clever way they thought to teach them to be good. They made Bill and Ben, Andy Pandy, and Blue Peter. But then the world turned wicked. Children wanted to see snogging and smack, so they had to make Grange Hill. It was okay, though, as the men made the Teletubbies to help with language, and the Wombles to explain recycling, and Ant and Dec to... the end. Children's TV on Trial, the 1990s. Continues tomorrow at 9 on BBC4.
Cross-examining children's TV decade by decade. BBC4 questions the 1980s now. Some of the best and some of the worst are in the dock.
I'm a poltergeist. As if by magic.
Hello, Wendy. We got on the first call today.
In 1983, vandals broke into the Blue Peter garden.
It's very sad to think that a few people take such pleasure from harming their fellow human beings and from hurting animals as well.
In the once innocent world of children's television, the bubble had burst. The rest of Britain was in turmoil. Kids' TV became reality TV. The grittier the better.
I want a word with you. No! In here.
Elsewhere, powerful forces were at work. Children were no longer just an audience. They'd become a market.
These shows were just buy, 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 toy, 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 you will get them.
This is what happened when the turbulence of the 1980s crashed into the innocent world of children's television. By 1981, Windy Miller and his friends from Trumptonshire had been pensioned off and returned to the music box for the last time.
At the start of the 80s, there was a general feeling that all the old Watch with Mother shows were really past it and almost patronising and sort of out of step with what kids were experiencing nowadays.
The BBC created 2 new shows to give the under-5s a taste of real life in modern Britain.
Pigeon Street was set in an urban landscape and was reflecting life for children who were living in urban surroundings.
If you lived in Pigeon Street, here are the people you could meet.
It was a soap opera,
It was,
really,
yeah,
wasn't it?
it was a soap opera. And there were, like with a soap opera, you jump from one scene to another and there's several storylines.
In the tight-knit neighbourhood of Pigeon Street, everyone helped each other through the ups and downs of city life. From saving their playground to building a vegetarian cafe, the whole community pulled together.
We both used to work in Chiswick, so it was the kind of world that we'd passed through coming down the Westway in Turnham Green, and we tried to reflect some of that type of urban settings.
The cast mirrored the mix of people who lived in real inner cities.
If you didn't have black characters in it, it wouldn't have been very representative of the real world that we were actually living in at that point.
In kids' telly, since the 60s, there had been multicultural characters, but Pigeon Street was the first one that really put black families, for example, centre stage and made them not just the friend down the road or some sort of sidekick. These were children's TV characters in themselves who are worthy of having a whole show based around them.
There's Jim on his roller skates. He's the eldest there and likes keeping an eye on the younger ones. Gerald Snail wins by a horn.
I think they wanted something that was more up-to-date, something that was a bit more now, which is, I think, what Pigeon Street was trying to be without being too fashionable. So we tried to make something that was a little bit timeless, but nevertheless felt very 80s, I guess.
I'm Mr. Clark from the council. Why are you measuring the playground? Because it's going to be knocked down and a car park put there instead. It's all on the plan, see? Knock it down? You mean we're going to lose our playground?
It was a very definite 1980s show, but it was groundbreaking, and it was one of the first that really started pushing a more overtly lefty agenda.
It's the last day of term. Next term there won't be any dinners made at school. They cost too much, so the children will have to bring their own. And Betty won't have a job.
When you think back on the whole notion of Pigeon Street now, it almost sounds like a really 1980s sort of box-ticking exercise. But I think that's unfair, because the show had a lot of charm.
Pigeon Street had its fans, but despite its right-on agenda, only one series was made, perhaps because it lacked a vital ingredient needed to hit the big time in the 80s.
Pigeon Street is this wide cast of characters, and there isn't a single person to latch onto that kids can get into that you could merchandise.
But another show, first broadcast in 1981, had no such problem.
What a lovely day, said Pat to Jess as they drove along the valley on a fine sunny morning.
It starred postman Pat Clifton, who, with his cat Jess, was always ready to lend a helping hand while delivering mail round the valley of Greendale.
Good morning, Pat called. Morning, Pat, said Mrs. Goggins.
Postman Pat was intended to be about rural England for the under-5s. And the idea was this postman drove around the countryside and met countryside people.
Pat told them all about Katie's lost doll, but they hadn't seen it. Poor Katie, said Pat, and on her birthday too. I know, I'll take her a box of chocolates. That'll cheer her up.
Every little boy wants to be a builder or a fireman or a postman, which, for some reason, when you're 5, seems impossibly romantic.
It's Katie's doll, said Pat. I found her when I wasn't looking for her. I'll take the chocolates anyway, said Pat. They'll make a nice birthday present.
There's something iconic about the way he looked, something idyllic about his lifestyle. The characters, Postman Pat, Jess in the van, were the very obvious icons of the show. I suppose that caught the imagination as well.
When Pat arrived at the twins' party with Sarah Ann and the chocolates, Katie gave a big smile, the first that day.
It's always very difficult to say, why did something take off? It just did. A hugely attractive thing right from the word go. And they had a good song to it.
Postman Pat, Postman Pat, Postman Pat and his black and white cat.
For the marketing men, Pat and Jess really delivered. The Royal Mail stamped their logo on Pat's famous red van. Images of Pat and his cat were emblazoned across a host of products, from building blocks to bedspreads. For his creators, Pat was a money spinner, which was just as well.
Pat feels he's a really happy man.
Everybody had to become more commercial. Everybody couldn't just pour money into programming and not get anything back, because the world had changed. Commerce had changed, people got greedier, the city got greedier, share prices wanted to go up. So yes, of course it changed. Everybody changed, including the BBC.
Homegrown kids' programmes faced tough competition as commercial pressures drove broadcasters to buy in hit shows from abroad, especially the US.
You compare the cost of a bought-in American cartoon on a per-hour rate with, well, the top end would be costume drama, but even a domestically produced piece of animation. Buying programming in is just a very cheap way of putting stuff on the screen.
But these low-cost shows did more than just fill airtime.
By the power of Grayskull!
He-Man had been commissioned by the American toy company Mattel. It was the first time a series made on behalf of a toy manufacturer was shown on British telly. Each episode followed the adventures of He-Man as he fought against his evil enemy, Skeletor.
It was quicker, it was a little bit faster paced, it was more exciting for our children. And of course they could make it over there, whereas we didn't have the capacity in the UK to do it.
I thought they were fairly crudely drawn, fairly simple-minded, and essentially dumbing down.
Next time you might try knocking first. Get him!
Yet children loved it. He-Man averaged between 6 and 7 million viewers every week.
Keep your fangs to yourself, Beastman.
When we looked at He-Man at ITV, we actually thought it might be a bit too moral, because they were very, very slam-dunk moral issues.
In today's story, Skeletor was looking for a shortcut, a quick way to riches and power.
good always beats evil in the end, and we all sort of sat there and thought, wow, this is a little bit too much.
Don't sell yourself short. The right way is the best way.
However, it had that wonder of having 65 half hours that we needed to schedule, and so we made the conscious decision to buy it.
Of course, British telly has to bring in He-Man because the kids want to meet this guy, they've heard about him.
He-Man, the most powerful man in the universe.
He-Man's got to be the first one that I got into.
Yeah, He-Man was an early one.
And I had the sword, I had the skeletal mask, but then I remember a hell of a lot about the Thundercats.
The BBC had a blockbuster of its own. Thundercats fought intergalactic villainy on the planet Third Earth.
I was a little bit nervous about it for the BBC because it was high action, boy driven, very American programming.
Fans could recreate the exploits of the Thundercats in the comfort of their own homes.
I bought the Panthro with the Thunder Tank as well. That was my favourite toy of all. Big thing, the claws came up all the time, push it along.
I was never lucky enough to have a Thunder Tank.
The sword was the best thing that you could have.
If you had the sword, you were lying out, whereas if you had the toys, you were merely a fan. So the toys came out first, didn't they?
You still had to have as many figurines as you could, and they did the different things.
You give a kid a couple of Thundercats so they got one to talk to each other. And, you quite
hours
easily,
of enjoyment.
You can keep yourself occupied for hours with that, easily.
Another American toy giant, Hasbro, were behind the hit series Transformers. It featured vehicles that miraculously became robots battling for control of their home planet Cybertron.
Transformers, robots in disguise.
And Optimus Prime.
Autobots, transform and roll out.
Yeah.
Roll out.
The toy Transformers were also puzzles that could be turned into robots, just like in the cartoon.
Thanks.
The best thing about them is the fact that it turn a normal car, a caravan, a station wagon, anything like that, you could turn it into a robot and start walking along with him. I'd get my pocket money on a Saturday and it wasn't a hell of a lot, but I'd go down to the local toy shop and I would spend hours in there choosing my next toy to play with, whether it was going to be a Transformer or again, whether it was going to be a Thundercat.
Something with Transformers, there were so many of them. And, you know, it was very well interlinked with the TV show.
Let's roll.
You know, Series 3 starts and there's 2 new Transformers. The first thing you're going to do is be ripping at your mum's trousers and go, Mum, please can I buy another Transformers?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's quite clever.
Never have too many.
No, the bigger collection, the better. And I think a hell of a lot more respect from your mates.
But the biggest hitters of all arrived in the late 80s when 4 pizza-munching turtles living in the sewers of Manhattan took the world by storm.
The scripting was absolutely brilliant, very funny. These 4 turtles were just hilarious and did the whole superhero thing, but in a very funny way, which hadn't happened a lot before.
You think they want to mix it up with us?
If they do, I don't like the odds. Yeah, we were trained to fight people, not can openers.
Attack!
But Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were skilled martial arts warriors. They first appeared in a comic aimed at older children. When the concept was revised for a younger TV audience, the violence remained graphic and included the use of some weapons illegal in this country.
Turtles fight with honor!
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was an unusually violent show for kids. The great thing about it was that here were turtles taking big swords to each other and taking nunchucks to each other and whacking people over the head. And for a British palate, that was maybe a bit on the nose.
The BBC believed a name change would help them avoid controversy.
We discussed the word ninja inside the BBC and just thought it did have violent connotations.
Let's break some fights!
At that time, England didn't know too much about martial arts or anything. It just seemed as though it was associated, quite frankly, with violent gangs. So they changed the title to Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles. We took the word ninja out of absolutely everything associated with it. Children used to do their sword fights with it, but it was all in great fun, the same way they used to play cowboys and Indians with guns and bows and arrows.
Michelangelo, Don't lose your patience.
The whole violence thing is not what it's made out to be. When you're watching some human-sized turtles who can speak fluent English, I think you can quite understand that it's quite fictional as it is. So the fact that there's violence there doesn't really make kids want to. There was got a lot of hoo-ha, wasn't there? Mothers complaining against these turtles beating up other turtles.
Cartoons like the Turtles were clearly targeted at boys who wouldn't be caught dead watching programmes like My Little Pony.
What could happen? It's a beautiful day. The sun is shining. Life is wonderful.
My Little Pony and Care Bears were two of the most quietly sick-making series I've ever seen in my life. They were so yucky and just did not gel for an English audience. I think even our girls, although they love the toys and they love what goes around them, the series were really a little bit too sicky for us. I think our girls got a bit more oomph in them than that.
These programmes weren't to everyone's taste, but keeping the grown-ups happy was never their primary function.
Well, you hurry up!
We're talking about programmes that are produced at the behest of toy companies. It's Mattel, Hasbro, the big American toy companies that are basically getting companies to produce programmes that will act as a kind of shop window for their products. These programmes get called by the critics 30-minute commercials. And the argument is that, in a sense, there's been a shift in the commercial strategy, that these companies no longer need conventional advertising when they have programmes that will, in a sense, be a commercial for their toys and all the range of spin-off products.
The toy companies denied they were manipulating children, but parents were outraged.
It has been suggested that television doesn't influence people. If it doesn't, can anybody tell me why manufacturers and publicity people spend millions of pounds advertising? Of course it influences you.
That's what people objected to about shows like He-Man or Thundercats or My Little Pony. It's just this sort of insidious marketing, which is undercutting the parent, going straight to the kid and saying, you want to have this toy, make mum and dad buy it.
I used to get people coming to me when I was head of department with a toy saying, I'm sure that this would sell very well if you could make a film around it. This is not the right way around. A certain amount of controlled merchandising is fine in providing money in order to make the thing in the first place. But the dangers are huge.
On one level, you can say, well, that what's happening here is that children are being exploited, that they're somehow innocent and they've been seduced and manipulated by evil marketers. I would say, actually, children understand a great deal of what's happening here. They certainly understand and can be, if you talk to them, very cynical about advertising, for example. So the idea that somehow children are simply passive dupes is quite questionable.
Even if children did absorb these messages, they may not have detected some more subtle American influences.
The trouble was that the cheap, not very intelligent import that came into the country undercut the British product. So there was inevitably a kind of a dumbing down and a kind of erosion of our own British culture.
He's the greatest. He's fantastic. Wherever there is danger, he'll be there.
A cartoon parody of James Bond, Danger Mouse was a fearless superhero with a rakish eye patch.
Well, I suppose what made Danger Mouse British was the fact that, in part, in any case, he was based on previous British heroes, detectives, secret agents, and he was not afraid of anything, prepared to risk everything for the sake of the nation and the world.
Enter at your own risk. Enter what at your own risk, Chief? The Bermuda Triangle. That's a musical instrument, isn't it?
Then he had a sidekick, who was a very British sidekick, Penfold.
Aha! You don't fool me. I'm not afraid of silly old hairdryers.
And, of course, Colonel K was absolutely your desk-bound, by Jove, about it, etc., colonel kind of blimp character.
Good show, dear. Got a problem only you can solve.
But I put new batteries in your video game last week, sir.
Pretty Britishness was an integral part of it. And of course, the whole series, in any case, tuned into what the British public understood, and the British culture, the British experience, the British sense of humour, the British use of language.
Nelson, lying down on the job? Good grief! It's it! All right, that's your last laugh, Curly Conk. Here I come.
You've got, David Jason and Terry Scott, and this weirdly literate script which is packed with puns and parodies and all sorts of business going on. It's something that is almost uniquely British.
Oh, Chief, how are we gonna get out? Grab a tooth, Penfold. But Chief, why? It's getting dark, Penfold, and if my theory is right, we should be out of here any minute now.
Created by Cosgrove Hall Productions, Danger Mouse was the first British cartoon to break into the American market.
God, Chief, how did you know they were false? They still had the price tag on.
Cosgrove Hall had been selling Danger Mouse to the Americans, and it had gone down extremely well.
I don't know how to tell you this, Penfold. Yes, Chief? But we've gone off the edge of the universe.
Somewhere around 84, 85, American money from a company called Nickelodeon started to come into the Cosgrove Hall productions. But with the upside of the money came the downside of the interference.
Effect on people landing in, 1 slight headache.
Now, I wasn't aware of very much of this until all of a sudden one of the characters in Danger Mouse had to change.
Hey, Baroni, you have forgotten the weapon.
The Americans who had put the money in, who were actually based in New York, suddenly felt extremely uncomfortable about this, because it was plain that Stiletto was, broadly speaking, a mafiosa.
Si, Baroni.
So all of a sudden, Stiletto, when we came to the next series that we made, had to be changed into a fairly similarly rough-spoken, similarly evil East End Cockney.
Boy, oh, Baroni, but I'll get Danger Mouse, don't you worry.
But made the Americans happy, which turned out as time went on to be more and more of a consideration.
As Danger Mouse struggled to hold on to his identity, another rodent was making a name for himself.
Good grief.
In 1983, ITV launched TV-AM, their answer to the BBC's breakfast show. It was spearheaded by 5 broadcasting heavyweights. But early ratings were a disappointment. The neglected children's slot reversed the fortunes of TV-AM. Its frontman, the self-styled superstar, Roland Rat.
Good morning, Britain. Roland here. Caption, please. Upside down, Kevin.
Roland was a cynical loudmouth from East London who'd first appeared on TV-AM during its summer roadshow.
Well, TV-AM, unfortunately, was subject to a lot of political, I wouldn't say backbiting, although actually there was quite a lot of backbiting. And there was a lot of rat-like behaviour. And if you could survive that, you could survive anything. And fortunately for me, they didn't think children's was important, so I just beavered away and did my own thing.
Excuse me, that phone is disconnected. So if you're trying to ring your agent, forget it.
Within a few months, Roland propelled the audience from 100,000 to nearly 2 million.
Yeah. There were a great many people taking themselves terribly seriously in the 80s. So when we did The Rat, I was very aware that it would chime in with what was going on, and it did.
Yes, I'm ringing regarding Boy George. It's the studio manager here. Yes, well, he's not prepared to do the interview.
I told you, he's a personal friend of mine.
Yes, well, he said he's never heard of you.
Well, that's charming, that is, isn't it? Well, I didn't like him anyway.
There was no sense that Roland had any reverence for anything, and I think that was partly true of the 80s. You know, let's just brashly walk over everything, and we're still suffering, I think, from the residue of those times. But yes, he was very much of his time.
In some ways, I think you can see that Roland Rat was a backlash against all this kind of inauthentic American product that was coming along, because it's a very surreal, distinctively English phenomenon, Roland Rat. I mean, firstly, he's a rat. His friends are vermin. You know, these are not traditional things that kids want to go and cuddle. He lives in a sewer. And there's just a huge amount of very surreal, odd humour encoded in that.
Rat fans were treated to 3 chart-topping singles. The success went to Roland's head. He credited himself with single-handedly saving TVAM.
Without me, the place would have gone bust ages ago. No one was watching the bilge they were churning out. The viewers only tuned in when I was on. When I was off, they switched off. Simple as that.
Being the rat he was, Roland jumped ship and went to the BBC.
It's Roland Rat the series. Thank you, fans. What a privilege it must be for you all to have me, Roland Rat Superstar, in your living rooms live on a Friday night with my own brilliant new series. I love you all. Yeah.
Once you actually take a character like Roland out of a context where he can make fun of everything and debunk everything, and you take him seriously and you say, right, I'm going to make you a superstar, which of course he isn't. I mean, the children knew the joke was. You thought he was something he wasn't, which is something children understand very well. Of course, they gave him a show at the BBC, and of course it was a complete disaster because the joke wasn't there.
Roland Rat's star had waned. After just 2 series, he was sent on extended leave.
Well, Rat fans, what can I say? We've had a fab series. It's time for me to jet off to the Caribbean on me Todd.
Time for human presenters to step into the limelight. Puppets were restricted to supporting roles.
I wanted children's programmes to have an identity of its own. This is children's programmes. These are your programmes. Not just a sequence of programmes, one following on from the other. It was a proper package. Then we got a very good guy from the presentation department who was in charge of it, and he auditioned various people and found a young man called Philip Schofield, who was the first guy who presented it, and that's how that happened.
Presenters Philip Schofield, Andy Crane and their furry sidekicks linked children's programmes from a closet on the 4th floor of Television Centre.
Not for nothing was it called the broom cupboard. It was very small. It had a desk about, it was like sitting behind a small desk. There was a camera, it would have been up there, and a few faders, and it was completely live and completely self-op. If I didn't open the fader and switch my mic on, I would be mute for the link.
Oh, are we on?
There were so many things that are brilliant about the broom cupboard, and one of them is just that it was kind of lifting a lid on telly. And they talk about how the Big Breakfast sort of broke down barriers and included the film crew and the researchers into the mix. But, Philip Schofield was doing that before.
Well, apparently this work has to be carried out fairly...
Would you hold that, sir,
Yes, OK, fine, thank you. This is fairly... I'm on air at the moment.
On the what?
On air.
I'm
on television at the moment. So you have to do this. Don't... What have you done?
Well, I just took the plug out.
Don't touch!
Oh!
You soon learned that the best material came from the people that were watching.
Song sheets at the ready if you've got them, and don't forget that National Willy Fogg Day is actually April the 28th.
When we did National Willy Fogg Day, which some people still celebrate. I got an email from a couple of students recently saying that they still celebrate National Willy Fogg Day. I've forgotten the day. It was the end of Around the World with Willy Fogg, which was a very, very, very long programme. And I decided that it would be great that if everybody watching could sing along to the theme tune.
2, 3, 4. 80 days around the world. No, we won't say a word before the ship is really back. Round all around the world. This is dreadfully flat.
So I said, I tell you what, I'll write out the words to Willy Fogg, and if you want one, just send a stamped addressed envelope. It was the first time in children's BBC history that we had to get in the BBC mail department to help us, because we were getting 12 and 13 sackloads a day of people wanting this Willy Fogg song sheet.
Come on, let's do the credits, Ed. Just like we used to do. Children's BBC for the last 2.5 years has starred Ed the Duck.
I know that Michael Grade putting Neighbours on at 5:30 was about the best thing that ever happened to my career. We ended up with audiences of about 13, 14, 15 million people. And there's me and the Duck for 3 minutes beforehand. They're not switching on to watch me and Ed, they're switching on to watch Neighbours. We just had this enormous inherited audience. I mean, can you imagine that now? The length of a pop video. Just go on BBC One, Andy. 16 million people will be watching. Just do what you like. Never happened, would it?
What's this? It's a message from the Duck.
At the engineering department Christmas party, see you later, Ed the Duck. I don't believe this.
I don't think the powers that be realised quite how powerful it was at the time in terms of bringing an audience together and getting across a message and having the impact that it had. If they had, perhaps more pressure would have been brought to bear to make sure that we promoted BBC stuff and talked about BBC product and so on and so forth than we did. That we didn't was the reason it was a success. You can't have both. You can be disrespectful and anarchic and funny and naughty, and that's why people watch. So if you go, well, people are going to watch, so now be sensible and talk about BBC stuff, they'll switch off.
The slot was a training ground for presenters like Philip Schofield, who broke out of the broom cupboard to become a star on Saturday mornings, forging a winning on-screen partnership with Sarah Green.
Philip and Sarah were really, really special. They were one of the most perfect combinations. They had everything that perfect presenters should have.
Good morning.
We love it.
Good
We
morning.
love live
Welcome
telly.
to Studio 7. Can you hear me?
2 seconds to go and Sarah's microphone breaks down.
I worked on Going Live. I called it Going Dead because I used to have to be there so early in the morning, but it was that was very good. That was good fun to do.
By the 80s, Saturday morning TV had become an epic 3-hour medley of interviews, cartoons, live phone-ins and music. The recipe was a success. On Saturday mornings, audiences of up to 9 million were tuning in. Pop stars were quick to exploit the show's popularity. Even politicians joined in, turning Saturday mornings into a battleground.
Politicians would come onto the programme because of the popularity of the programme. And if you wanted to talk to young ears, then Saturday morning was the place to do it.
You can ask politicians all sorts of outlandish questions if you're doing it on behalf of children, you see. So I said to Neil Kinnock, why are you and Maggie Thatcher all shouting at each other?
I think it's quite possible that we're two people that, whatever our professions were, if we worked in the same factory, the same office, the same school, we probably wouldn't get on with each other because we've got divergent personality.
Now, when would he say that? Well, you never say that, would you, in a grown-up current affairs programme?
Now we welcome into Superstar our special guest this morning, one of the world's most powerful women, the Prime Minister, Mrs Thatcher. Good morning, Mrs Thatcher.
Good morning.
I had to go and meet her in the main reception at TV Centre, and she came clippity-clocking across the room with a sort of wicker basket, like a granny, you know, with some presents in to give to the viewers.
Margaret Thatcher really understood that it was a very sensible thing to do. She thought about what she was doing. She thought about what she was going to bring to give away. And then when she sat on the video vote and discussed pop music with whoever the stars were at the time, it was magic.
I thought it didn't matter. It didn't get anywhere, and I wanted to say get on with it, so I'm very much on the threesome side.
3 for you. Not much melody for you.
Hmm?
Not
No,
enough
it's
melody.
too much like a rehearsal. There was a lot to be done before you really had the production.
The children would ask her questions. And a lot of the questions were more biting than the sort of questions they'd be asked on an adult programme, because the children's perception of what they were meant to be doing was probably clearer.
Do you find it easy to keep your temper in the House of Commons when someone from the opposition interrupts you?
I'd just like to ask, what do you think is the most important decision you have made which will affect the whole country in the long run?
In the event of a nuclear war, where will you be?
What was in it for her? Well, clearly to be seen in a softer, more friendly light. That was the political spin-off, I imagine.
In another Saturday morning slot, television's first agony uncle, Philip Hodson, talked viewers through the serious business of growing up.
You are still at primary school. You've already finished your puberty. You're only 10 and you finished. I'm tall and broadly built, but I have to wear a bra.
But it wasn't all about hormones and heartache. Uncle Philip tackled some of the thornier issues of the day.
Because AIDS is a disease that can kill, because we're afraid of diseases that can kill, and because there's no cure for AIDS, so what happens is that rumours fly and there's more ignorance about AIDS than almost anything else.
80s kids were growing up fast, and children's television had to keep up.
We felt that the world of children was changing in all sorts of ways, and the world of television was changing in all sorts of ways, and we better do something about ourselves and make a few changes in the way we were making programmes to open things up a little bit, to try and do a few new things in order to provide a service that was useful to kids.
Britain in the 1980s was a very politically saturated society in a way it isn't today. And even as a child, you could feel the country kind of rocking to either side of you, whether it was the miners' strike or the Thatcher-inspired riots and the mass unemployment. And you had this almost this vision of Margaret Thatcher hanging over the country as this kind of grim spectre. And that was inevitably going to percolate into children's television.
Since the mid-70s, Newsround Extra had repackaged grown-up news for a young audience. But as well as reporting political events, the programme took part in them. In 1983, it held a mock general election for kids.
We've been debating about the fact that we needed to do more about politics. And we thought, well, why don't we have a Newsround schools election using schools from all over the country.
Now, in this week's Radio Times, the one with this cover, there's a special form that head teachers can fill in for schools to take part in the extra election.
We had less than 3 weeks to get this together, and we ended up with, I think, about 200 schools taking part from different constituencies.
The schools had their candidates, they had their hustings, they had their vote.
Alliance, because they aren't going to try and get rid of nuclear weapons straight away, they're going to try and bargain them away.
Conservative.
Why in particular?
Because their policies make sense, whereas the other parties don't.
Labour Party, because I think they do more for the people. They'd bring employment down, and the Tories are no way doing enough for this country.
It was a very good way of getting children involved into the political system and becoming, hopefully responsible voters.
We went along to several schools to see how they got on. And first of all, they had to pick their candidates.
A radical and reforming programme is required. So remember, think positive, act positive, vote Labour.
The choice is yours. The policies put forward by an extreme Labour Party would jeopardise our defence and security.
The Alliance offers moderation and steady recovery. The Alliance is the party of good sense.
There was concern in the BBC at the time about what we were doing because it was a somewhat new idea, and obviously we had to abide by the Representation of the People Act, but also we had a little bit of fun with it as well.
You have to see it in the context as well of adult television, which was incredibly and intensely politicised, whether you had Edge of Darkness, feeding the idea that we were going to all die in a nuclear holocaust, spurred by our politicians, or Boys from the Black Stuff, which was all about mass unemployment, or even the heyday of primetime news programmes like Panorama. So television itself was a much more overt political instrument.
Some of these issues were covered in children's TV's answer to Panorama, the BBC's hard-hitting documentary strand, The Lowdown.
The Lowdown was the only programme that was around at that particular time that focused on heart-to-heart issues.
Living in Peckham, this is a tough scene and a rough scene unless you got enough team on your side to make you realise the situation I see with my own eye.
Yeah, we live in Peckham. We just hang around here all the time. Well, I don't find nothing wrong with it, really. It's because when people see it on television, they think, oh my God, this is a disgrace and that. But when you just hang around it all the time, it's just like your own house, you know what I mean? You're living in your own territory.
In one episode, children took over the running of a school. Another explored the topic of imaginary friends. One of the most poignant was about divorce.
I thought I'd never see my mum again.
So what did you do?
I just kept quiet and did what everybody else said. When I got to go to bed, I went to bed quietly. I didn't speak to a lot of my friends, and they asked me why was I unhappy. I didn't speak to them.
Why?
Because I felt so I'd just never see her again. I didn't feel like speaking to anybody.
Were you worried about your dad?
I was worried about my dad would leave me as well. And I'd be left on my own.
It was them being allowed to see what really goes in our minds as children, what we're really into, what we do and we don't like. And for, you know, subjects like divorce, it would then show from a child's perspective what they're going through, so that the adult could see, well, this is what's going through, you know, this is this generation, this is how they feel about it.
My mum and dad used to row in their bedroom, and I used to, you know, hear them from my room, which was next to theirs. And I used to run in and try to stop them, but there was nothing I could do about it.
I used to think that, you know, everybody else has got a dad and I haven't, and I don't deserve one. You know. But I don't think that anymore, but I used to when I was quite small.
And we did get one letter from a parent who said, I don't think you should be doing that sort of thing because it's too hard-hitting. My reply to her was that if you went to an average classroom, you'd find that 1 in 3 kids had experienced exactly that. And so kids were only too well aware of the issue because they were living it. And it was our responsibility to listen to what they had to say and to hear their point of view.
One edition featured the teenage rap group Partners in Rhyme.
The whole idea of Partners in Rhyme is not that at all. And there was a marriage of everybody that had the same idea that this is not what rap's about. It's about, you know, coming together. It's about expression. It's about how you feel, putting it into the point of rhyme. So that's what it was, and it was just talking about current affairs and where we were as kids.
Life as a teenager is pretty tough because people don't really take you seriously and they're almost scared of us. They see stuff on the telly, they hear about people getting mugged and stuff, and they just presume it's all teenagers like that, but it ain't. Like, we walk down the street, they see us coming and they turn around because they don't want to pass us. They only think the worst of us.
I think it hit the nail on the head for what we were into, what we were listening to and what we wanted to express. And I think that was really, you know, the lowdown really provided that for us as an outlet to get out and let people know what rap music was about, you know, back then.
There's so much bad stuff going on in the world. The greenhouse effect, CFC cans, violence and racism.
The Lowdown was a really important series because it was a proper documentary series for kids which took the subjects and the audience very seriously and explored some really difficult subjects, and I think was of a very high quality.
Boundaries were also being crossed in kids' drama. Since 1978, the exploits of a group of pupils from the fictional South London school Grange Hill had transfixed young viewers and alarmed parents.
The issues that were tackled with Grange Hill would be within normal schools anyway, especially comprehensive schools that I was brought up in. You've got your bullying, your shoplifting, there was pregnancies within school kids, and I think that was where the stories were so strong and they were taken so seriously. Adults would be like, oh, you know, this doesn't go on, but if you'd have gone into a school as a child, all these issues were happening, and kids could relate to them for that reason.
What's your cloth head?
Grange Hill's had lots of success with issues, particularly in its earlier years. And I think one of the things that it did brilliantly was a story about racism.
Gripper picked on the weak and vulnerable. The school's black and Asian pupils soon came under attack.
I'm not sitting near you.
What you done, Gripper? That map took me hours.
You didn't have to sit there. Monkeys over there.
There were problems, but for myself, my character was very much like the Glenroy character in Grange Hill, the way I lived my life.
What'd you say your name was again? Glenroy. Glenroy? What sort of name's that?
Suppose you tell me. No, man. We had things like the National Front that you had to contend with, and you would be going to school with children whose parents were members of the National Front. So yes, Grange Hill was very true to, I think, to what was going on at the time in inner London schools.
Drown, you scum.
The standoff in the locker room was a very, very violent scene.
Gotcha now. They will get him this time.
You had both groups throwing each other into lockers which bent and buckled.
Let's have it then, Stepson.
Both groups lifting up chairs and hitting each other with chairs. You had people punching each other, throwing each other about. It did take something like what was shown on Grange Hill to actually start to make some changes and start to have people really look at the society that we live in and be willing to change it.
Grange Hill continued to tackle some of the most controversial issues of the 1980s. Most shocking was Zamo's tragic descent from popular schoolboy to heroin addict.
Heroin was a taboo subject and everybody done it was classed as a horrible person. They used the Zamo character because Zamo was well liked. He got on with the kids as well as the parents. So they chose a character that people could relate to and then would watch the story with credibility, and so that, you know, nice people can get involved with drugs. That was the angle they went with.
Mrs. Maguire, this is more than just thieving. The money's a means to an end. We have reason to believe that he's stealing because he's using drugs.
And it was just a deterioration of Zamo from the nice, happy-go-lucky guy to, you know, in the end, taking drugs in the toilet.
And you don't believe me either, do you? But best mate, well here. See how much heroin you can find among that lot. Satisfied? Or do you want me to strip right off? Oi, don't fiddle with that, it's broken.
What can I do?
Yeah, well, just don't fiddle with it, all right?
Bring it in for anyway. We've got history this afternoon, not maths.
Yeah, well, just get your hands off.
All right, leave it, Zamo.
Out of the way, Kev.
Just calm down.
I won't tell you again. Move. Move, I said.
Samo!
Just give it. We're not playing games now, all right?
Oh, yeah, and that's what it was this morning, wasn't it? A game. She used pads instead of heroin. It's a real thing, ain't it? Don't tell me I'm wrong.
Just give it, all right?
But why you're off drugs now? You proved it to me, remember?
Maguire.
Zamo.
All right, son.
In another episode, Rowley finds Zamo slumped in the toilets of a nightclub after taking an overdose.
It was the first episode with no music finishing, and the camera just closed up on Zamo, and that was quite sad. It was sad to watch as well, to see the downfall of such a lovely character.
Zamo, you all right?
Look, you better get him out of here. Boss don't like junkies.
Not only does Grange Hill do a story about heroin, it probably does the best depiction of drug abuse on telly ever, really. I think you'd be hard pushed to find a show that did it as well as Grange Hill did.
Just say no.
In support of the anti-drugs campaign Drug Watch, the Grange Hill cast recorded a single which reached number 5 in the charts.
Well, it was funny, actually, because I was asked to sing on the record, and I can't sing, so I sang a note in the rehearsal, and they said, right, Lee, you won't be able to sing. And then they said, can you dance? And I started to dance, and they thought I was messing about. So this is where you can't dance on the video either. So if you look at the video, I'm actually weightlifting and not dancing, because I can't sing or dance. I got not a lot to do with the record, which now, 20 years on, I'm glad to say, but, I mean, I was just there anyway.
Maybe it was a naff record, maybe it was a naff video. But nevertheless, it made a big impact.
Like Grange Hill, ITV's Press Gang tackled serious social subjects, from solvent abuse to fraud.
I think it's the Guinness Book of Classic British Telly describes Press Gang as probably the best programme in the world ever, and it would be quite hard to argue against that.
The hospital regarding
Staff at the Gazette were kept in line by its hard-bitten editor, Linda Day. Despite its serious subject matter, the show had wit and romance.
So, you're back.
Yeah, I'm back.
I would have baked a cake, but I didn't.
Yeah, I figured that was the reason.
Well.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, me too.
Later?
Absolutely.
OK, everyone, the cabaret's over. Back to work.
Press Gang is very much a product of the 1980s. You have a woman in charge who is very brittle, very fierce, has no power of empathy, is very cruel to the people around her.
Linda, stop asking, just do it. And make it good, give it some zap. Some zap? Am I getting this right? You want me to liven up an explosion?
I want you to give me the best work you've done, Sam, and make it stick. This is our big chance to show what we can do.
Well, that's a new angle.
What?
Gas leak, bomb or career opportunity. Linda, there are people in that building.
I know.
Do you? We're talking about the dead and dying here, Linda. And I'm supposed to put in some zap. How about I just do the obituary column in colour?
It was really slick. The dialogue, the crosstalk is very, very sophisticated. It's kind of like Moonlighting meets Grange Hill. There's romance in there. And it presents a world where adults don't really count. And that's always appealing for kids.
Colin, I want the books. And I don't want to hear how they've been eaten by your cat, or how they were stolen by a roving band of deranged accountants, or how the recent stock market collapse in New Guinea has rendered the figures meaningless in a very real sense. I want the books now. You're giving me the books? Don't think you fooled me for a minute. I want the real books.
The whole series tracks the consequences of Linda's complete lack of compassion and her cruelty, how it affects the people around her and how it eventually leads to her own destruction and death. And anyone who knows anything about Britain in the 1980s can see some pretty clear parallels with our own Prime Minister.
Press Gang and Grange Hill ventured where children's TV had never been before. At the same time, new technology gave programme makers the opportunity to innovate. In the mid-1980s, Channel 4 broadcast Pob, one of the most unusual children's series of the era. It was destined to become a cult classic.
We've always at Ragdoll been interested in what technically you can do, even if it's a bit Heath Robinson, you know, mock it together, which that was. We spent £1,000 on this puppet, a great deal of money then. So a great deal of money now even. And we absolutely didn't know what to do, because basically what you had here was an Eastern European wooden puppet that had to be worked with rods, which would, of course, show on the screen, etc. And because I couldn't afford to make another one. I had spent my entire puppet-making budget. So Pob became what he became partly through the limitations of this puppet, who was the most anti-television puppet you could imagine. So we had to dress the puppeteer from head to toe in blue lycra and paint all the rods blue and whatever.
Each week, a celebrity guest tracked Pob down by unravelling a piece of wool.
If in my program you would be, wind the wool and follow me. Oh, wind the wool and follow me. Red, 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 yellow, 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 yellow.
Yes, follow the wool. You know, one of our most astonishing things was being rung up by Spike Milligan, who demanded to be in the show. Because he thought it was mad, and he was, you know, always up for anything that was a bit mad. And he had to follow the wool around the garden.
The opening sequence was notorious as Pob appeared to spit on the camera lens.
For some reason, he made this sound, which was later interpreted as being spitting. So he became the puppet that spat on the screen, which was not the intention at all.
Pob was relatively low-tech, but throughout the 80s, children's programmes used increasingly sophisticated special effects. When the BBC, with over $1 million of American investment, made Box of Delights, the results were much more spectacular.
The Box of Delights was the beginning, really, of bringing back high-scale children's drama.
But I have something they want.
The Box of Delights.
Based on a children's fantasy novel, Box of Delights featured an upper-class schoolboy, Kay Harper, striving to possess a box with magical powers. The scenes described in the book were realised on screen through state-of-the-art computer graphics.
It just happened at the right time when we did it, when we were on the cutting edge of new technology and were able to combine animation, which is absolutely vital if you're going to do that story, with live acting.
Now, be a stag in the wild wood with me.
got 3 BAFTAs for the box, and I don't think that's ever been topped in children's programmes. We got 1 for the series, 1 for design, and 1 for special effects.
The success of Box of Delights helped bring other fantasy dramas to the small screen.
These were classic stories being done in a modern way, so that having done the Box of Delights, when I got back to the BBC and the BBC had just managed to get the rights for the Chronicles of Narnia, we could say, all right, it's very ambitious, but we've been able to do the Box of Delights. We know how to use special effects, and we can do something like the Chronicles of Narnia.
By today's standards, the graphics look crude, but at the time they amazed audiences.
The Chronicles of Narnia was a huge undertaking for the children's department and was only made because Michael Grade told BBC Worldwide to invest a considerable amount of money in it, and money actually came to us from the drama department.
In the 80s, computer games began to emerge as an important player in the world of children's entertainment. As an answer to games like Dungeons and Dragons, ITV broadcast Nightmare, described as the world's first virtual reality TV show. It was presented by Dungeon Master Hugo Wyatt.
4 from London tread the path, through dungeons deep and caverns dark.
He's probably, at the time, in the late 80s and early 90s, in any school playground in Britain, he was probably the most imitated person. There would be kids going around saying, "Ooh, nasty," which is his famous catchphrase for whenever a team died in the game.
Oh, nasty. The set I was in was real. It was a real set, proper things and everything else. And the advisors went into that, and so did the Dungeoneer originally. So they never, ever saw the blue set.
The gate is opening! Advisor,
The lone Dungeoneer was blinded by a large helmet and sent into a blue screen set. Through computer graphics, a hazard-filled fantasy world was created around him. 3 teammates in a separate room directed the Dungeoneer through an imaginary maze in search of treasure.
Corridor of a palace.
The technical aspect of Nightmare was quite incredible. I didn't know how it was done or what was going to happen very often, and things would appear that absolutely amazed me.
Walk forward. Walk forward.
Some of the gameplay was really quite complex. It was always challenging, and also it was quite scary. A dungeon is a dark, dank, dangerous place. It's not the sort of place you'd send 6-year-olds in, even in fantasy terms with drawn environments. It's pretty convincing. We scared an awful lot of children, but they made for great gameplay once they'd been scared.
But you'll get them calling out, "Go left, go right, go left," and the poor thing's out there going, "Well, what do you want?" You know, we didn't actually get what you... but near enough. Ooh, nasty.
To some viewers in the 80s, it was children's TV itself that had become nasty. In some cases, the pursuit of ratings and profit had made the merchandising more important than the programming. But it was also a decade when children's TV got its hands dirty for the first time by tackling some of the more unsavoury aspects of life in the real world. As the decade ended, British broadcasting stood on the threshold of a digital revolution. The multi-channel explosion would impose even fiercer competitive pressures on programme makers and drive them to greater heights of creativity in the years ahead.
So what lurks under the average teenage bed? And worse still, what's in their heads? BBC4 gets unprecedented access to the teenage bedroom. Next.
Sometimes the best thing to do isn't.
The one to watch tonight.